Welcome everyone to this wonderful webinar, and I think it's exemplified by the beautiful picture we have on the screen right now. I am happy that you're joining us for this talk. This is actually a series that Sustain Our Abilities does in conjunction with the International Society of Physical and Rehabilitation Medicine, and we have quarterly programs. I'm really happy today to introduce Matt Erb, who is an excellent speaker and has agreed. Accidentally muted. Matt is an integrative physiotherapist. He's based out of Tucson, Arizona. Matt has served as senior faculty, clinical supervisor, associate clinical director, and communications specialist for the Center for Mind-Body Medicine in Washington, D.C. He has a clinical physical therapy practice with Simon's Physical Therapy in Tucson that focuses on mind-body integrated care and the role of physiotherapy in mental health care. Matt is an instructor for the University of Arizona, Banner University Department of Psychiatry, Family Medicine, and Integrative Medicine, as well as faculty with the Integrative Psychiatry Institute in Boulder, Colorado. As founder of Embody Your Mind, Matt has produced numerous peer-reviewed publications, including a seminal textbook, Integrative Rehabilitation Practice, the Foundations of Whole Person Care for Health Professionals. Matt is motivated to co-create enhanced ways of delivering whole person healthcare that concurrently addresses socio-ecological factors, and he is active with efforts to address climate change and its intersection with individual and community health and well-being. And we are really excited to have Matt join us at Sustain Our Abilities and to present today. If you're not Sustain Our Abilities member yet, please join us. We want to work on the intersection of climate change, rehabilitation, and disability and health. And Matt embodies working in this space. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Matt. Well, I've introduced Matt. I'm going to turn it over to Matt. And the other thing I wanted to say is if you do have questions during his presentation, please put them in the chat and we will work to have him answer them at the end of his talk, which will be in about 50 minutes. All righty. Take it away, Matt.
All right. Thank you so much. I was about to say good morning. It is 7 a.m. here where I'm at on the west coast of the United States. I'm actually in Tucson, Arizona. And I thought I'd just start, that introduction says a lot about my background. I work as a physio who uses a mind-body integrated care approach, and I specialize, many of the people I work with are experiencing both persistent somatic health challenges alongside mental health challenges, and working to advance the role of physiotherapy in psychiatry and mental health as one of my many hands or professional assignments in my hats. So why are we here? I like to think of this as just one small step in the co-creation of addressing solutions for climate and change and interrelated challenges that we're all facing. I approach all of this from a stance of humility and uncertainty. These are the ideas and contexts by which I currently approach it, and I like to remind myself daily to hold all meanings lightly and to work together flexibly and creatively, because our own understandings are continuously in flux. And things are changing in our world at a pace that's hard to keep up with, from information to social issues and so on. I want to acknowledge the overall general nature of suffering in the world, the prevalence of both present day and historical trauma that impacts many individuals, communities, and populations. in my work, and this is actually the mission statement of my small consulting business, is to maintain a foremost commitment to the amelioration of suffering in our world. And I approach my work from a stance of humility. If I say or do anything that carries ignorance, misunderstanding, or adverse impact, I welcome feedback. I invite you to call that out as a chance to learn and heal together. And I also want to recognize all that has been taken from people of First Nations around the world and all that remains to be healed. So it's important for me, as just a small gesture on top of the actions I take in my life, to acknowledge the land. I am sitting on the land that's the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Tohono O'odham and the Pasquayaki peoples and tribes, and I recognize them as the original stewards of this land and all the relatives within it. And so I just invite you to pause for a moment to contemplate, maybe take a breath or two and just contemplate the history of the land that you're on and all the energies that it carries and has carried across time. So thank you for that. And I'll then frame the rest of the talk by acknowledging that I have lived and worked in Indigenous communities. I myself am not Indigenous by blood. I have been adopted into 2 different North American Indigenous communities, the Oglala Lakota Sioux from Pine Ridge, South Dakota, and also the Anishinaabe or Ojibwe of northern Minnesota, the White Earth, and have learned so much in my living and learning and working with these communities and other Indigenous communities around the world, both through the Center for Mind-Body Medicine, but also through some of the other areas of my work. And I believe that Indigenous wisdom carries a vital facet of our ability to begin to shift individualistic views and tendencies in our socio-cultural landscape towards more of a lens of interdependence that can then become a motivating factor that can align with our individual values to help us move forward. And this does not forego the science-based world, the evidence informed or evidence-based world. There's been some movement in Canada and First Nations in Canada around the idea of two-eyed seeing, which is seeing through one eye and then seeing through the other eye. One is Indigenous, one is more academic and scientific, to optimize how we respond. This is our agenda. I want to just briefly overview a broad understanding of what is integrative health, and then weave that into the social determinants and why social determinants of health are so important in this discussion. Then give you a little bit of background specific to climate change and overall health, both mental and physical health, how that links into stress and trauma, and why it's so critical that we have capacity in all healthcare professionals to be able to appropriately address those topics. Then looking at the concept that self-care, which is part of integrative health and mind-body medicine, as eco-care. Now, in some talks I say is co-care, to point out that self-care approached in context is not an individualistic construct, that it actually becomes a collectivist construct. And I added the E for eco-care to extend that into the environments that we live, work, and play in. And then just kind of connecting the dots amongst all of this for the working framework that I operate from. So we'll start with what is integrative health, and sounds like someone's not muted. If we could mute them, thanks. This is from a graphic that was created for an effort defining integrative health and rehabilitation. And it looks at all of these scientific disciplines. So like the spiritual realm is historically the discipline of religion. The cultural realm, sociology and anthropology, and so on. You can see all of them down to subatomic or nonlinear levels, quantum physics. And integral thinking implies both and instead of either or. We get into thinking it's either psychological, so we look at personality or cognition and emotion, which is the realm of psychology, or it's somatic, organs and tissues like medicine, biology, physical therapy, um, and integral thinking considers the whole of living systems, and it encourages transdisciplinary learning. There was a book written a few years back, New York Times bestseller list here in the United States, called Range, and it talked about to succeed in this ever-changing world, people need a greater range. And I see that as sort of a malleability, a ductility, a flexibility in the ability to serve various facets of the whole person experience, and how individual whole person experience is informed by the larger landscapes that we navigate. And so looking at this from the holistic lens as opposed to overly reducing, over reductionism, both in causality, but also in the solutions that we might bring forth to support people. It requires sort of a teamwork amongst layers and levels. And so to conceptualize complexity and causality, I like to think of health at the individual and the collective level. The emergence of health experience is subject to dozens and dozens of ingredients. So it's like a soup recipe. So we have things like personal history, collective history, lived experience, and prior learning. We have things in the psychological domain like emotions and affect and needs. The social determinants of health, which I'll go into next, socioeconomic status, genetics, the cards were dealt, but then the understanding that genes are like light switches that can turn on or off based on what they're exposed to in the social environment or the natural environment or the organizational or built or neighborhood environment, layers of environment. So it's really much more complex, and we tend to like simple answers. I don't have it in this presentation, but there's a graphic that shows simple solutions, complex but difficult, and there's like 3 people on the road to the complex side, and the masses are lined up on the road to the simple solutions. And I think that's a real challenge that we face, because we like it to be a simple answer, that this is why I'm experiencing this pain in my back or whatever it may be. This underscores the humility via which I approach my work. When we get into the social determinants of health and why they're important to our discussion, and keep in mind, I'm doing a setup here, a framework to get to the intersection of the integrative health concepts to climate. But we look at the individual level, like an individual person in the center here, with their own genetic predisposition, their psychological makeup, their ability to self-regulate, the type and nature of the resilience that they embody. But each individual is embedded in some of these layers. So you have the family environment. This starts at maternal support and health during pregnancy, early stress exposure, which I'll talk about a bit more in a moment, and so on. At the community level, we have institutional access to transportation and education, food security, neighborhood safety and pollution, and then going out even larger. Oops, let me go back. Sorry about that. And this idea of individualistic versus collectivist societies, structural inequities, racism, and so on, and how this shows up across the lifespan from in utero and birth to old age and death. This is a socio-ecological model of risk factors. If we then look at this from this lens, and so this is a graphic I created for today, we each have an individual body mind, our own makeup. But as individuals, we're embedded. I like to think of, I use the word bathed in but we're embedded in layers of environments. The political environment, which is quite charged around the world right now. I suppose we could say it probably always has been charged. Social environments, the natural environment, historical environment, which we might not think of, but how history shows up in the present, the built or constructed environment, cultural, economic, and organizational. And these carry significant influence. When I get to the self-care part, I'm going to reinforce that the choices people make are subject to the choices that are actually available to them. And so even in lifestyle medicine, I sometimes speak up and say, it's not so simple as just eat this food or exercise more, because that may be restricted from a variety of layers and levels, these upstream determinants. And so it's rather simplistic, and it actually falls into biopolitics. If I look at this political, where this, pull up your bootstraps and take charge. And that's a lot easier for some people than it is for others based on the layered environment that they're embedded in and the resources available to them. Even if one's environment carries affordances, things that can help you get your needs met, sometimes people need to be taught how to access and utilize those affordances. So even when they're available doesn't mean that they're readily accessible or utilizable. And the reason this is so important is that these societal factors can either be risk factors or protective factors. It's kind of like one of those scales of balancing. The societal conditions, these environments that people live and work in, can either dial up the threat appraisal response systems that are hardwired into us. It's really survival biology. I like to think of it as a radio dial when I teach this in the clinic. And it dials up our arousal, our defense mechanisms, our stress and trauma biology, which can go up to and including fight, flight, and freeze, some of the trauma signs, which I'm going to cover in a moment. So out of this picture arises each person's unique physiological state or physiological patterning and how that informs behavioral choices and responses. I call that the integrated biobehavioral response. And this is really underpinning the science of allostatic load, or in public health and climate research, it's the exposome, the sum total of exposures and how they are or are not offset by positive resources, a strength-based lens, positive experiences. And to put this all together, this section, this is a graphic that I found from this report, Mental Health in Our Changing Climate Impacts, Inequities, and Responses, about how these inequities and vulnerabilities at the societal, individual, and physical or natural environment layers interact with climate changes, climate disasters, and inform persons who may already be experiencing physical health, mental health, and community health challenges. So this is to point out that climate change is disproportionately impacting certain populations over others. And it's critical that we recognize that and give additional, we want to address it for all, of course, and give additional tailored support to specific communities. As we go on, we're going to talk a little bit here about climate change and health in general. And this is just kind of background. Let's see, my slide's not moving. There we go. And I'm going to frame this with a quote from Nora Bateson, who's out of the United Kingdom. Says, the problems we're facing right now are so big, it's not possible to actually know how to fix them. And I'll also borrow a quote from a professor of psychology at the College of Worcester in Ohio, who said, anyone involved in this problem feels a very strong sense of frustration and anger, if not futility. And there's the sense that the stakes are so high, and there can be extreme pessimism that we're not doing anything sufficient, or if we are doing something, it's not going to be enough in the end. So it's really important to acknowledge this complexity when we look at how to create the safe and just space for humanity, which is this green zone here. The shortfall versus the overshooting. So the overshooting is climate change and ozone layer depletion and pollution and biodiversity loss and so on, chemical pollution. And the shortfall shows up in this social foundation, these topics of social equity, gender equality, housing, energy and resources, water, food, and so on. When we look at the impact of climate change in this setup, this is one study that showed that 59% of people are extremely worried, 89% are moderately worried. This was in children and young people. In one breath, we can say that's good because we want the upcoming generation who will be facing continuing our work after we're gone to be concerned and motivated to address this. But these stats are pretty concerning, greater than 50% anxiety, sadness, grief, 45% that this topic was affecting their daily functioning. And most people felt that governmental responses were woefully inadequate and felt greater feelings of betrayal than any sense of reassurance. So this is looking at the mental health aspect of it. And when we look at a sum of mental health effects, I'll get to the physical in a moment, the literature consistently points to negative associations on individual and community-wide mental health. So the psychological pre-existing mental health challenges that they're facing and navigating and experiencing, an increase in psychiatric hospitalizations, higher mortality among people with mental illness, and heightened suicide rates. And these results are largely in line with detrimental impacts on the other aspects of health. So you'll see these references as we go along, but this also looks at the intersection of physical health. So it's not just mental health, but physical health conditions are being impacted at acute, subacute, and at the chronic or long-term across time level. This graphic I found from the Centers for Disease Control breaks that down and looks at things like air pollution affecting asthma, cardiovascular disease, changes in vector ecology. This is like our recent COVID pandemic, malaria or dengue fever or encephalitis or now COVID. Increasing allergens, so people who are highly sensitive. I work with a lot of persons with the intersection of neurodivergence, so like ADHD and autism, who also have mast cell activation syndrome, who also have dysautonomia like POTS, and so on. And a lot of them become chemically sensitive or having increasing reactivity to pollutants and allergens in their environment. We have the water domain, and so on. So you can see how this is going to show up in a variety of physical health issues as well. Heat-related illness for extreme heat. We've had some excruciating heat here, and I've been in Tucson 10 years, but I haven't seen the stats yet, but it has felt like the hottest summer, consistently at 110 degrees Fahrenheit and above for weeks on end. And so what this leads me to come to next is, why is addressing toxic stress and trauma critical? I want to try to aim towards a public health lens on this topic, which I do believe the integrative health model in general is not just better suited to address, but my observations is it's better motivated in wanting to address, which I think that motivation and alignment with values that inform the committed actions people take is really important. And part of this is that we're really working in a sick care system, and it's overly reductionistic. It fails to look at that level, layered set of influences. And so when we look at trauma, which can arise in relationship to climate change, not just climate disaster, but trauma can be little t traumas that are cumulative across time, and that arise out of feeling overwhelmed by the state of the world, by the state of change. It's important to remember trauma is not always caused just by the event itself. It's considered to be an incomplete biological response to the experience or threat. But any experience that the system doesn't have the resources to integrate or that overwhelms the person's experience, both psychologically and physiologically, I put that together, psychophysiologically, can result in variations on toxic stress or trauma. Sometimes traumatic experiences may not lead to PTSD or even necessarily adverse effects, but you don't have to see PTSD to recognize the adverse impacts, just like we're seeing with climate change and mental health. The social determinants is here because trauma is systematic and associated with zip code, and it's very much situation and person specific. So there is an individuality to addressing trauma, and then we look at it from the public health level as well. And the public health level, fortunately, this is out there, and I'm guessing most people present or listening to this recording are aware of ACEs. This is, 30-year-old study plus. It was in the 90s now, that looked at categories of exposure to adversity in childhood, abuse, neglect, household dysfunction. But the research has actually shown that the original 10 categories of stressors has expanded substantially. And I've highlighted climate change and natural disaster here, but you can see other things like being unhoused, immigration, moving multiple times, spanking, racism, losing a parent to deportation, involvement with the criminal justice system. These are also adverse childhood experiences, and they also carry relative important impact if you're an adult. This doesn't have to be childhood and adolescent that these are impacting us. And so the current conceptualization of ACEs includes climate change. You can see this embedded in the environment. We have the household level, we have the community level, and then we have the environmental level, natural disasters, climate crisis, and so on. And so fortunately, this is showing up in that realm of studying ACEs. But because I don't want to fall into negativity bias, we know that there are positive childhood and adult, I don't want to just have the C in there for childhood, positive childhood, positive adult experiences that can offload that, remember that balancing, that plus or minus, mitigating the toxic stress, offloading it, supporting it, can shift people's health trajectory away from crisis and more towards well-being if we can design healthcare delivery and community-based public health resources that deliberately are doing that. So you can see some of these at the individual level, but I might one day create an umbrella that's very specific to offloading the adverse impacts of climate change, both at the individual level and at the community level. So keep that in mind as we now move into this idea that self-care is a form of eco-care. I mentioned this in my setup a little while ago, but self-care in context aims to move lifestyle medicine to a larger frame. I have a background in yoga training, yoga therapy. Last month, I was able to attend the SITAR conference. It's a symposium on yoga therapy and research conference held annually by the International Association of Yoga Therapists. It was nearby up in Phoenix, and 115 to 120 degrees up there, even hotter than Tucson. But I was reminded of a saying that was in my yoga training, that when we're serving ourselves, we're serving all others. And when we're serving others, we're serving ourselves. And so it's a reminder of this lens of interdependence, which really is not new. Living systems theory is not new. It arises out of indigenous knowledge and wisdom, and really all of the wisdom traditions from around the world. So that's where I'm going with this concept, but I'm using it to also frame out burnout. So when we look at prevention and addressing burnout in climate workers, we're faced with repeated distressing news. I mean, even just in the last 2 weeks, the climate-based news, and looking at my friends and colleagues, I worked in the aftermath of the hurricane and massive flooding in Houston back in 2018, I think, 2017, 2018. And many of those people that I connected with over the multi-year program we did there through the Center for Mind-Body Medicine are now impacted by this recent hurricane. And just looking at that over and over, something new is landing. We've had a lot of wildfires here. And even just 2 days ago, Tucson, which is extremely rare, had 2 tornado warnings. Massive damage. And this is in Tucson, where we don't normally see tornadoes like where I grew up in the Midwest. So there's this constant sense of frustrations with capitalism and the systems bureaucracy and these patriarchal and narcissistic and authoritarian dynamics, which are getting in the way of effective response to the issue. And the World Health Organization defines burnout, and I'm going to say from an overly individualistic lens, because it says stress that has not been successfully managed. The question is, who's responsible for managing it? I give a training program for psychiatry residents every year, and one of the first things I say to them is, if you're experiencing burnout, it's not a personal failing. You're working in a very difficult, broken, challenging system. So please offload any excessive sense of responsibility you might have for that experience, because they tend to put it back onto you as an individual. It's your problem to take care of this burnout, which is a deflection of responsibility from the systems, the upstream determinants that are affecting it. When we look back at Maslow and Leiter, this is 1997, they defined burnout as the index of the dislocation between what people are and what they have to do. It represents an erosion in values, dignity, spirit, and will, an erosion of the human soul. It's a malady that spreads gradually and continuously over time, putting people into a downward spiral from which it's hard to recover. And so this is really important to look at that definition, because as you can see, burnout's defined not just as an individual problem, but from this more ecological systems perspective. That burnout is directly influenced by workplace culture, society, and other manifestations in the underlying systems that needs to be addressed. And so how do we begin to return to empowerment as opposed to a sense of despair or victimization amongst conditions that are innately discouraging? And this is why I put this little quote up here. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but compassion is an edge state. I'm borrowing this from Joan Halifax, who wrote a book called Edge States. And she says compassion is a very narrow edge, and you can fall off either side into despair rather easily. And I think this happens a lot in burnout. And so what we're saying is that self-care is giving the world the best of you instead of what's left of you. We address it at the individual level so we can serve the goal of collective change. And we can, I saw a quote the other day that if each of us pulls a thread, eventually the whole darn thing will come down. So we've got to keep doing our individual work, but maintaining our own health and integrity in the process. So again, when we're serving ourselves, we're serving others and vice versa. And this is a tenet of integrative health that I think needs to serve climate workers and really all of us as we face things that appear to be outside of our control. that we're more effective at facilitating others through stress and trauma relief when we're rooted in our own skills. And there's evidence supporting that if you don't know what you feel, you'll actually have more trouble recognizing, relating to, and responding to what others are feeling and experiencing. So this is really moving deeper into inner work and our own embodiment. And to underscore this, I wanted to offer us a chance to just do a brief experiential. And I'm not seeing my time. Can you tell me the time? I don't have it up right now.
It's 10:37. We don't have a lot of questions and you are just doing great. So don't worry about the time. Just, I think, if you take the full hour to speak, I think we're fine with that.
Okay, thank you. So what I'm going to put up, I want you to look at this, and hopefully my animation is working. This is a Giphy, a composite of CT images that was created of a breath cycle. I want to do a short experiential practice. I'm rooted in mindfulness, mind-body medicine, which includes meditation type or like practices. And the breath is often involved. Body awareness is often involved. And I want to set up an experience here to give you a sense of connecting to your presence, to your ability to adjust the volume on your own stress response system, your own fight or flight system, and to come into present moment. I think of it as a pause into present moment presence, the beingness that we each are, because it's from that place that together we can optimize our ability to work together and to serve others. So if you're comfortable with it, you're going to see I'm going to close my eyes because this is helpful for me in the delivery. But in trauma-informed meditation, we say you can have your eyes open or closed. If they're open, you might have maybe a soft downward gaze. You might even feel like the skin on the forehead is relaxing to the eyes, and the head just drops a little bit and the eyes go to the floor. This can become a symbol of present moment presence. And also turning your attention inward. Much of our day and our life takes us out there. Our energy is utilized out there. This is a chance to come back in here. So inward and downward to see how the body's feeling. And as you do this, you may become aware of things you weren't aware of a moment ago. You may notice places that could be a little sore, or tense, or tight. You might notice something about how you're holding the body or your posture. But in contrast, because we don't want to reinforce a natural tendency known as negativity bias, seeking and searching what's wrong, the strength-based lens is to also notice what is neutral or perhaps loose, comfortable and open in the body, because we're holding both. And as you take this look inward and downward, you might correlate what you become aware of at the sensory, somatic, this physical level with your energy, how you're feeling, the emotional landscape. Correlating the two together. Research has even shown that just labeling our feelings, our affect, I'm feeling blank today, is associated with the potential to dial down that volume on the stress response center a bit. That research is called affect labeling. Other times when we turn attention inward and downward, we might actually need to feel the feels, the feelings. We might need to express them, find an avenue, a route for expression. Physiologically, that might be shifts in body temperature or tears. It might be verbal expression. Could be creative avenues like writing or art or movement. But just take this moment to check in with the body, linking it up to this realm of emotion and feeling. And I always say with the Goldilocks principle, not too little, not too much, just the right amount of attention and where it's needed most. And as we connect with this field of awareness, there's the breath, this ingenious mechanism of life, the powerful rhythms and cleansing actions of the breath. So noticing the sensations and movements of the breath. The way the body rises as you breathe in, and the way it settles back down as you breathe out. Just becoming more and more attuned to the feel of the breath moving in and out of the body. And if it helps, you might think to yourself some words that serve as an anchor to attention, because our minds do wander in these practices. That's natural and normal. But we have anchors to come back to: body awareness, breath awareness, and the regulation of the breath, where we might slow the breath, smooth it out, deepen it, or lengthen it. And you can think words to yourself on the in-breath and out-breath. Soft on the in-breath and belly on the out-breath, to remind the belly and the diaphragm to relax. Or maybe the whole body, soft body. You might also just choose words of meaning, important reminders to partner, to bring you back to your center, your motivations and values. And we'll just do this together for a few more breaths, exploring these foundations of mind-body medicine together. Observing present moment body and breath, breathing in and breathing out, and knowing we're sharing breath across space and time. Breathing in these environments that we're bathed in. And at the end of the next breath, maybe at the top of an inhale, or if you'd like, at the bottom of an exhale, if your eyes were closed, allowing them to open slowly from bottom to top. Otherwise, returning attention back to the screen, taking one last look at this powerful image of the synergy of the heart and the lungs. I like to think of our lungs and the breath as protectors of the heart. They're airbags. It's like in our automobiles. So this is really about dual attention, sensory and emotional, labeling, expression. What avenue is needed? Out of this, we can decide what's the next right step and thing in the day. I do a lot of these quick pauses and check-ins, sometimes shorter than that, but because we had the time, I took it a little longer. And we can now connect the dots a little bit. There's growing evidence, and I've been studying and teaching. It's not without its flaws, of course. No theory is without flaws, but the polyvagal theory. I've been teaching about it since about 2010. I've had the opportunity to even co-author with its founder, Stephen Porges, on a paper paralleling yogic teachings to the polyvagal theory framework. But one of the most interesting things I've learned from this, and that significantly informs my clinical work, the behavioral set that's accessible to us, those choices we make, are not just narrowed or widened by the choices actually available to us, but they're narrowed or widened by that graph I put up earlier, which is the threat appraisal graph, which you see here. So this behavioral set that we have access to gets restricted when we're dialed up higher in overall arousal, activation, stress. And so it's really important to realize this in the work that we do, that if we're stressed out, that's going to subsequently inform, oops, wrong one, sorry, our ability to act, to serve, to carry through with our work and our commitments that are rooted in our values. And so I really like to underscore that practicing self-regulation, and there's also evidence that when we physiologically are self-regulated in optimal regulation, that actually carries a direct effect on the people we're with. So that's called co-regulation. I mentioned co-care and eco-care, but it's actually physiological regulation is transferable between people. That if one person's heart rate variability is high and they hold that, it'll entrain or affect the heart rate variability of the person they're with. And so that's why this is so important that we tend to this inner landscape. And so our inner work and internal focus and development of presence is intersectional with this outer work we're doing for climate change. And I see this as the heart of integrative health, because integrative health includes this focus upon optimum regulation, healing, support for multi-layered whole person care. And oops, I'm going the wrong direction. Sorry about flipping around too much here. This actually, so some of what I'm telling you is not new, entirely new. In 2019, just before COVID landed in our lives, 3 integrative health professionals published Integrative Medicine is a good prescription for patients and planet. This was in the Journal of Alternative and Complementary Medicine. And I extracted some things and then added my own thoughts. But there's burdens and opportunities for healthcare providers. Healthcare providers are an integral force in educating the public about climate change health impacts, and they're the most trusted source regarding this. And I found that integrative health providers are much more apt to bring this up and explore it with each person. An ounce of prevention versus tons of greenhouse gases. There's research that simple changes in diet and exercise. There's one study, for example, short trips on bikes, replacing short trips down the block with the bike instead of the car, can substantially reduce greenhouse gas emission. So these choices do impact, and they're more apt to be addressed in an effective way, a realistic way through integrative health, rather than this sort of top-down, oh, you should exercise more, oh, you're overweight, which research has repeatedly shown has zero effect. It comes from a place of aligning people with their relationships, their values, supporting the ability to dial down toxic stress by addressing social determinants of health, and that may open up a wider range of options. Self-regulation and lower carbon happiness, so shopping, eating, traveling are pursued not just out of necessity, but they often are done because people are anxious, bored, stressed, seeking emotional gratification where emotional needs aren't getting met elsewhere. And so recognizing this, it's called the low carbon happiness movement. And mind-body medicine, which I just introduced you to, foundations of mind-body practices, body awareness, breath awareness, and adjusting volume, informs pro-social and environmental behaviors. So it's about helping people realign with their spiritual and religious beliefs, morality, ethics, values. I do a lot of what's called embodied action. This is acceptance and commitment therapy plus mind-body medicine together that helps people make those choices and move in the right direction. And not in a way that's unrealistic. You see this guy is trying to reach for this rung, which is above his hands, versus this ladder where someone's able to climb one small step at a time. So taking small steps aligned with our values. We're reminded self-care and integrative health has to move beyond individualism to collectivism. Next month, I'm presenting with some of my physical therapy co-authors to the Integrative Medicine for the Underserved conference on how integrative physiotherapy can help advance serving underserved, marginalized, racialized populations in a better way. Increase population-wide mind-body literacy. I was actually involved in a movement 3 years long across the state of Minnesota where we went around to nonprofits to help provide a model to enhances resilience, reduces burnout so people could do their work more effectively, that delivered trauma-informed systems. Involve engaged youth, which I think is critical. We saw those stats, and honor and embrace Indigenous wisdom. And so with that, what I want to do is close before we might have some questions with a quote. And I was just reflecting, it's been 13 years since I last read this quote. I actually read it at a funeral 13 years ago, and that just popped up as a memory. And this is from Chief Seattle in the 1800s. The president in Washington sends word that he wishes to buy our land. But how can you buy and sell the sky, the land? The idea is strange to us. If we do not own the freshness of the air and the sparkle of the water, how can you buy them? Every part of the earth is sacred to my people. Every shining pine needle, sandy shore, every mist in the dark woods, every meadow, every humming insect. All are holy in the memory and experience of my people. We know the sap which courses through the trees as we know the blood that courses through our veins. We are part of the earth and it is part of us. The perfumed flowers are our sisters. The bear, the deer, the great eagle. These are our brothers. The rocky crests, the dew in the meadow, the body, heat of the pony, and man all belong to the same family. The shining water that moves in the streams and rivers is not just water, but the blood of our ancestors. If we sell you our land, you must remember that it is sacred. Each glossy reflection in the clear waters of the lakes tells of events and memories in the life of my people. The water's murmur is the voice of my father's father. The rivers are our brothers. They quench our thirst. They carry our canoes and feed our children. So you must give the rivers the kindness that you would give any brother. If we sell you our land, remember that the air is precious to us, that the air shares its spirit with all the life that supports. The wind that gave you, our grandfather, his first breath also received his last sigh. That's the breath we just experienced. I'm just adding that in. The wind gives our children the spirit of life. So if we sell our land, you must keep it apart and sacred as a place where man can go to taste the wind that is sweetened by the meadow flowers. Will you teach your children what we have taught our children, that the earth is our mother? What befalls the earth befalls all the sons of the earth. This we know, the earth does not belong to man. Man belongs to the earth. All things are connected like the blood that unites us all. Man did not weave this web of life. He's merely a strand in it. And whatever he does to the web, he does to himself. And so it's with that that I've given a little bit of a sense of my lens on integrative health, climate change, this intersection, how we might begin to co-create movement forward so that we can serve the best possible way, whatever's next. So thank you.